Nearly every Wednesday, I make my way from the Blair School of Music to the Casey Potter Center. I put myself into the nice space. I sit down on the couches, hailed the comfiest couches on campus, by the way, and at 7 o'clock every Wednesday for 1 hour, I enjoy some of the best company I've had. This is because this is the trans and gender queer affinity group, one of the only places that I really feel home. For 1 hour, I get to talk about what's going on in my life, how I'm affected by trans issues on campus and throughout greater Nashville. But the second I leave that space, I don't feel quite at home. I know that the space around campus isn't as accommodating. In fact, according to the Williams Institute, specifically Gary Gates, about 0.3% of the United States population identifies as transgender. With the population at Vanderbilt University being about 12,000, that's about 36 people statistically that would identify as transgender at Vanderbilt University. That's roughly half of this room. For that reason, I believe that Vanderbilt University policy should incorporate more comprehensive gender sensitivity training for all faculty and staff members. I'll discuss the current situation with gender sensitivity training, as well as the problems that causes. I'll introduce a plan, how that plan solves those problems, and then I'll address possible refutations of that plan. So first, gender-specific sensitivity training documents are quite limited. The gender issues section of the Vanderbilt University website and sensitivity training documents only include women, and while that's incredibly important, we don't see any resources for transgender individuals. The second part of the gender sensitivity training documents is the anti-harassment policy. While gender identity and expression are listed in the anti-harassment policy, meaning that you can't discriminate someone on the basis of gender expression or identity, it's actually tacked onto the race clause, meaning that it was kind of a hasty tack onto the end of the policy. So the second part is that this lack of documents and the documents that do exist create a blatant discrimination of the transgender community in two ways. This is through knowing discrimination of the transgender community and unknowing discrimination. So first, faculty and staff members may experience or may put out purposeful discrimination of the transgender community. So personal prejudices through Facebook and classroom discussions can lead to purposeful discrimination. A lack of education for transgender issues and gender identity leads to quite frankly ignorant claims. In one article in The Hustler last year, published by Sean Riley, now a junior in the Peabody School, pronouns they, them, theirs, they published an article about their identity. The article was fruitful and had a lot to do with how they identified, but the more important part was the comment section on the article. A faculty member shared this article on their personal Facebook page, and this made the article essentially public to the greater Nashville community. Because the faculty here are seen as highly intelligent, for good reason, and many follow them and their views, this led to people outside of Vanderbilt University attacking Sean on the basis of their identity. Free speech is certainly important, but publicized ignorant claims against trans people lead to attacks in that comment section. Essentially, when faculty spread open hate, it spreads to the greater community. So the second part of discrimination, probably the more important part, is unknowing discrimination. So this essentially means that faculty and staff members employ different policies and employ different classrooms discussion that lead to this unknowing discrimination of transgender individuals. So I'll talk about the current housing policy as well as the Psychological and Counseling Center here at Vanderbilt. The current housing policy has actually been extended for this year, which is wonderful, but there still is no option for gender-neutral housing for first-year students. And according to a 2010 survey by the Pew Research Institute for Higher Education, trans students face double the discrimination of cisgender students, or students that do not identify as transgender. Because gender-neutral housing attracts those who need it, people who understand are less likely to discriminate against those people. So the second part is the Psychological and Counseling Center. So upon reviewing the Psychological and Counseling Center website, which is the university's counseling center for therapy and psychiatry, information on the website for LGBTQIA plus individuals points to the Office of LGBTQI Life. And I frequent the Office of LGBTQI Life every day. I know the people quite well, and let me tell you, they're not counselors. They're wonderful individuals, but they're not trained psychologists, they're not psychiatrists, and they don't have degrees in medicine at all. And this is incredibly needed. Psychologists and psychiatrists that are trained are really, really needed because according to that Williams Institute study that I listed before, 41% of transgender individuals attempt suicide at some point in their life. So the solution then is to incorporate thorough and mandatory sensitivity training. And I would like to do this through a 3-step plan. The first part is to create basic documents to replace the gender sensitivity or even add to the non-existent gender sensitivity training documents. There are examples of these through the TSER, or the Trans Student Educational Resource Center. These documents are free and list sensitivity training that can be used by all jobs and by anyone. The second part of this plan is to make them specific. So in the TSER documents, there are specific resources for faculty and staff members. So using the appropriate documents would be key in making sure gender sensitivity training is thorough. The third part, and probably the most important part of this plan, is to make gender sensitivity training mandatory. So this could be incorporated through the anti-harassment policy lecture that all faculty and staff members go through at the beginning of their training, as well as maybe facilitating discussions within departments or within certain groups of staff members. So this combats the problem of unknowing and knowing discrimination. For knowing discrimination, the more knowledge that one has, the less ignorant claims that one might make. And for knowing or unknowing discrimination, actual resources might crop up if people know that trans students do have these issues on campus. So I'd like to address 2 possible refutations to this plan. The first is that people might say that finances are scarce for Vanderbilt University and we don't have the funds to provide comprehensive gender sensitivity training. I'd like to reiterate that trans student educational resource documents are in fact free, and adding it to the current anti-harassment policy lecture is not a large commitment at all. The second possible argument is that a training won't solve any larger issues. But I'd like to point out that this is a starting point. We don't have resources largely because people don't know that we need them. In fact, after sitting down with higher administration over the past few months, I've learned that the more I educate them on the resources that transgender students need, the more apt they are to work with me and to make specifically housing advances. And I can say happily that this is something that we are now working on at Vanderbilt University. So I talked about the current situation of gender sensitivity training documents, as well as the problems that poses. I introduced my 3-step plan and talked about how this would solve those problems. I finished by addressing possible arguments to that plan. The transgender queer group is wonderful, and I can honestly say that I love the people there. But I would also love if I could walk out of that building every Wednesday at 8:00 p.m. and feel like I have a home on the rest of campus. Thank you.